This one is going to feel like 2 episodes in one. It probably should have been 2 episodes, to be perfectly honest with you, as we'll have all the usual Game Week preview stuff, plus a full roundup of the summer transfer window, attempting to find answers to questions like, who should be your first waiver pick this week? How do you pronounce that new Newcastle striker's name? And do you hang on to your injured players or wheel them out the back door in their wheelchairs? All of that to come in this episode. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 4. This really feels like the end of summer now. A lot to get through in this episode, as I just said. And with that landscape of high profile injuries plus shiny new players in the waiver piles, makes for some intriguing decisions for many of us. Intriguing is one word for it, at least. I know this is going to be a very, very busy week for Draft FPL. I know a lot of leagues out there run similar rules to what we do in our home league, which is that all of the players that have been added to the game since we drafted have been locked. So in my home league, it isn't just those players that we saw come in the final couple of days of the window. There are a whole host of players that we can finally get our hands on in the waivers. So that'll be fun. But even for those of you that have just been keeping it as a free-for-all, we saw a huge amount of activity towards the back end of the window of what has been a massive summer for the Premier League transfers, as we'll come on to in just a minute. And some well-needed additions, because we obviously had a few high-profile departures from the Premier League too, and departures from our draft team. So we need to bolster our squads again, and I think there are definitely some exciting prospects in there for us to talk about today. Not least, all of the usual names and faces who we should be considering, and it's important to try and weigh those up against the shiny new toys that everyone wants to get their hands on. Recording this late in the afternoon on Monday, the 8th of September. So this, if you're listening later in the week, could be out of date if the players mentioned have been injured while away on international duty. Before we get into the content proper, I want to draw your attention to our site. Those of you that have been regular watchers, consumers of the pod and the YouTube now for a while will know that we've got a companion site, draftfc.co.uk. And for those of you who haven't taken the plunge before or just haven't been sure it's for you, then now is the perfect time to jump in, because we're running a 1-month free trial for everyone who uses this code. In fact, we're not trying to hide it. It's not just for those watching and listening. It's there on the homepage. So if you want a 1-month free trial, just use the code KICKOFF when you complete your sign up. It's only valid if you're signing up on a standard monthly plan, which is $3.99 a month. If you buy the season outright, this won't give you anything at all. But for those of you who are just wanting to try before you buy, then 1-month free trial is about all you're going to want anyway. So it's a great time to do it. You'll be able to get that full trial as we head from this current international break into the next international break, which is just a month away. And see if you like what we've got to offer there. All of the stats, all the roster percentages, all the waiver changes, all of that I get directly from the site. That isn't hidden. That isn't special information that we hold just for the content. That is there for all of you to peruse at your leisure. We're making improvements and tweaks all the time to the data center, to the live game week, to the league analytics, but we're pretty happy with how it's looking already. And of course, if you want the full list of my draft rankings, I continue to update them once a week. So if you're deliberating over certain waiver decisions, certain trade dilemmas, then that can be a nice quick reference as well, just to see how I'm currently rating the players. It's not always a definitive thing. If you're carrying a load of injuries, just because player A is above player B in the rankings, they could be quite close. And so, it doesn't always factor in. So I don't want you to just follow it as a prescriptive list, but it's a good starting point. The other thing which we underestimate, I think, quite how useful draft managers find it, is our predicted lineups page, which many of you will be familiar with if you have looked at our predicted lineups on the homepage. But if you're looking at the predicted lineups from within the app, it will pull all of your league data into that and show you quickly and easily which players are available and which players are already owned by yourselves or your fellow league rivals. So at a glance, you can quickly skim down the list, look for starters that are available. So lots to get into. I don't need to talk about it too much because ultimately you can go and explore it for yourself. The only other caveat is it is only for new customers. So if you've used that sign up before, the code will not work. So the waiver deadline will process at 11 a.m. on Friday, the 12th of September this week, ahead of the main game week deadline at 11 a.m. on Saturday, the 13th. So nice to have a fairly standard waiver deadline heading out of the international break. As I just mentioned, there is another international break after game week 8. So we've got another little mini bite-sized chunk of the season that we can plan for over the next 4 game weeks. As I said, right at the top, this is going to be a long one. There's going to be a lot going through some of those late transfer additions, plus then all the usual stuff. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So some of the main talking points coming out of game week 3, the top one there, hamstring. Lots of hamstring injuries, and we'll cover those on the injury slide in a little while. But yeah, lots and lots of us now with multiple injuries that we're having to contend with. Not just hamstring injuries, there are a few others out there, but Cunha went down with one. Shirky's missing now for a while. Delap, of course. Saka, we already knew about. Lots of big, high-profile injuries now who not going to be out for too long, but certainly a chunk of time, which means you have to plan around them not being there in your squad. And some of you, no doubt, will be getting cold feet about whether to hang on to them or not. Players like Delap, who I know many people were not as hot on as we were at Draft FC anyway to begin with. The fact that they're now going to potentially miss, the next 5 or 6 game weeks does not, I'm sure, fill you with even more confidence. I think it really depends on the shape of your squad. If you've got a pretty healthy squad, if you've got 14 good players, 2 other good strikers, and Delap is your only injury, I wouldn't feel too hard done by carrying that injury at the back of my bench the next 4 or 5 game weeks. However, if you drafted Saka and also have Cunha and Delap, then it may be one injury too far that really limits your flexibility. Also depends where you're sitting in the league, because if you are down in bottom place or the penultimate spot in your league, then you will have access to some of the new forwards that have been added to the game, and that may alter your decision making. If you're at the top of the league and looking to make that change, then you are going to have to settle for, depending on your league size, probably quite a below average forward option to replace him with. So, if you're in average size leagues, 8 to 10, the options that are in your waiver pool generally are not going to be good. Say this week is slightly different because we've got those new additions, but otherwise, I think you are probably going to be having to make the hard decision to hang on to him. That's the sort of thing where if you're looking at my draft rankings, you can see who are the strikers that I rate above or below, but it's really difficult to be that prescriptive because it hugely depends on this. If you're in a 16 draft league, then the caliber of forward options available in the waiver pool generally pretty high, and you can think on a short to medium term basis rather than if you are in a 12, 14 team league. If you drop a player like Delap, somebody will hoover him up on the waivers the very next week, despite the fact he's out for so long, because of the value of a forward like him. So yeah, can't be too prescriptive, and everyone's team, everyone's injury situation, everyone's cocktail of issues that they're trying to fix will be different. And of course, where you're currently sat in the league will have a big bearing on the waiver pick you have. Next talking point, Sunderland stocks remain up, but they do go away to Palace in game week 4. And I do like the look of some of the Palace players with that fixture in mind. Another team who continued to impress are Everton under David Moyes. Another impressive win last week. Another impressive outing, Jack Grealish, who is racking up the attacking returns and will no doubt feature in our main section later on in this episode. The next talking point, what should we expect from Manchester City this season? That is a big question. Another poor showing, another defeat to Brighton. And we did say the week before that we have no idea how that game could pan out. That could be a 6-0 defeat to Brighton all the way up to Brighton winning the game, which they ultimately did. City, it has to be said, if you watch the game, City were in pretty good control for the majority of that game. If you switched off after 60, 70 minutes, you'd have been surprised to see how the final result went. That's not to take away credit from Brighton, because in that final 20 minutes, they were by far and away the better team, and created some really dangerous opportunities, which ultimately they took to win that game. Rodri was a big miss. I can't remember the exact number of minutes he played in that game, but when he went off, there was definitely a shift in the momentum. Brighton were also pretty brave with their substitutions. They made 3 or 4 all at once and just looked a lot fresher and just seemed to have the legs all over the pitch to make it work. But City have still got some sorting out to do. They still look really vulnerable at the back. Stones was missing for that game, which was a miss. We saw Kusanov come in, who himself played really well. Again, if I recall, was forced off somewhere around the 70, 80-minute mark, and was a bit of a miss for them too. Lots of their assets, though, are being dumped. I mean, Shirky is one who will be on the injury list this week. And given the amount of time he's been out, given the way he's been used so far, I mean, I've already dumped him. I took him on draft day. He's already gone into the waiver pile for me. So if you are holding on to Shirky, he is someone that I would not feel too bad about dropping for some of these other options that will be presenting themselves to you this week. We saw Matheus Nunes finally start a game and didn't do very well. Again, he's someone that I've already binned off. So I would not feel too precious about many of their assets. Aside from Haaland, Marmoush, Foden, despite the fact that we haven't seen a lot of him already, I think his ceiling is still high enough. Rodri, Nori. There aren't too many others that I would say you have to keep hold of. So yeah, don't get sucked in just because you see that Manchester City badge on your screen. There's going to be a lot of rotation, and yeah, you can do better. And then finally, the big talking point, which really rolls into the first half of this episode, is the summer transfer window. The biggest summer transfer window in history has finally closed. So we can talk about some of these final deals that got wrapped up on those final days. And yeah, over 3 billion spent by the Premier League across the summer sets a new record. And as Forbes are pointing out there, just a whole number of players, in their case, going for $40 million or more. It wasn't just those marquee players going for more than 100 million that have made up. They will only put a small dent in the more than 3 billion spent. It was just the sheer number of players who were going for mid-tier money, which have obviously made up that total spend. So I'm not going to cover any of the players that were already in the game prior to last week. So these will just be the ones who are brand new for the waivers going into Gameweek 4. And obviously most of these were very late deals done in the window. So it's not a perfect list, but I've tried to split this roughly into 2 slides. We've got the standout transfers, the big names that went for big money, and then some of the other transfers who may be not as well known, going for lesser fees, but are also potentially ones that we need to think about as draft managers. Now, the first one right at the top of the list is a player who already has 98% ownership across the majority of draft leagues, and that is Alexander Isak, who has finally got that move from Newcastle to Liverpool. We've been mentally evaluating this move for what feels like months at this point, and say on the final day, the transaction finally took place. A new British record fee. What does that even mean at this point? Bolstering arguably what has already been the best attack in the league in terms of the starting 11. And there were a handful of 18 draft leagues out there so shook about the possibility he remained on the naughty step all season long. He even dropped outside the first round on draft day. Now, if you've played FPL before or watched the Premier League before this season, I don't have to sell him to you. If you're new around here, though, there is a reason he's just been bought by the defending champions for an all-time record British transfer fee. He was the best striker available in Europe this summer and comes with the level of experience at the top level that makes him as close to a guaranteed success as you can get. The only thing that really stands in his way is his health and fitness. Isak is no stranger to a pulled hamstring or a tweaked groin, but the reassuring thing from a Liverpool perspective is that he's been able to increase his physical output pretty much year on year. He made 34 appearances last season with 29 attacking returns from those appearances. An overall Premier League record, 86 appearances, 54 goals, 10 assists, with an overall non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 of 0.69 means we can safely conclude Isak is very good at football. Anyone claiming that this move devalues him can really only make a case on the fact that one, he's moved, and often that needs some adjustment time, and two, as we've discussed on previous pods, being a player sold for more than 100 million can be a millstone around a player's neck. He will be the starting number 9, irrespective of Ekiteke getting a bit of a head start on him. The two can play in the same 11, and they will all need to rotate as we enter a demanding 3 to 4 month period with matches being played pretty much twice a week. If a rival manager in your league is making noises that suggest some level of dissatisfaction with owning Isak, dissatisfaction which could only grow when he inevitably doesn't start in Gameweek 4, trade moves should be made to take that problem off their hands and add him to your own team. Now, with Isak departing Newcastle and with Callum Wilson having already joined West Ham earlier this summer, Newcastle found themselves with a distinct lack of number 9s and quite a lot of money now burning a hole in their pocket. Their plan, I think, was to try and replace goals now and gamble on replacing those goals for many years to come. This plan turned out to be quite an expensive endeavour, and you do wonder whether they could have got much better deals with far more choice at their disposal had they just sold Isak a month ago. But that's Newcastle's issue. Anyway, the solution to how do Newcastle replace those goals now, it seems, comes in the form of Yoane Wissa, who himself pulled some Isak-esque antics to leave a bit of a sour taste in Brentford fans' mouths to force that move through. Ended up going for £55 million in the end, which is probably about 50% more than what he's worth, all things being equal. But as I will always point out, the amount of money that the clubs pay for these players does not impact where we should take them on draft day, other than to give us some idea, some indication of how much the club values that player and how likely they are to play. Now, he's just turned 29. He's coming off the back of a career season with Brentford last year, getting 22 attacking returns in the league. Some of that comes down to positioning. He was an out-and-out number 9 last season, whereas in previous years, he was playing wider in a front 3. There are clear positives here. He is productive, non-penalty expecting goal involvement of 0.74 last season, off a Premier League average of 0.52, which is, of course, excellent. Newcastle also provide, I think, a stylistic fit, and their transition pressing-based approach should suit his skill set, ready-made. He's also proven himself to be incredibly robust on the injury front, averaging more than 34 league appearances per season since he joined the Premier League, a trait which even stretches back to his days in Liga 1 when he was playing for Lorient. The negatives really are the same built-in caveats to any player on this list making a move to a new club, but I think the main negative for Vista specifically is that Newcastle also splurged even more money on another number 9, who they will probably be eyeing up as the closest thing they could have found in the end to an Isak replacement. And that player, of course, is Voltemada, joining from the Bundesliga from Stuttgart. He's 23 years old and went for around 90 million euros, so somewhere between 70 and 75 million British pounds. Now, again, the worst case scenario here is that Newcastle paid a hefty premium due to leaving their business so late. For context, Bayern Munich made an approach at the beginning of the summer for less than what Newcastle bought Vissa for. They were coming in at around 55 to 60 million euros. Stuttgart told them in no uncertain terms that that would not be anywhere near enough, and Bayern pretty promptly stepped out of the negotiating room and haven't gone back since. So that tells you where they valued him, and I don't think that if that deal had gone through with the money that Bayern had offered, nobody would have been thinking that Stuttgart had been ripped off. So again, similar to Vissa, at best, they've overpaid by about 50% of what he should be on the open market. Now, you'd be forgiven if you hadn't heard of him much before the news was announced. He came up through the youth ranks of Werder Bremen, made his senior debut at just 17, didn't really crack into their starting 11 until he was 21, started 12 games in the 23-24 season. Off the back of this season, he was transferred to Stuttgart, And then last year, he made 28 appearances, starting 17 of those, scored 12 and assisted 2. Put up non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 of 0.7 from those games last year, though this is much higher than his previous Bundesliga seasons where it sits at a rather polite 0.5. Now, if you're thinking surely Newcastle wouldn't spend 90 million euros on a German striker who is only proven over 17 league starts last year, well, they did. That's exactly what they did. The flaw here is that he becomes an absolute flop in the Premier League, unsuited to the physical demands of the league, unsuited to Howe's Newcastle system, and too much of an outlier in terms of his skill set to ever reach the heights that Isak climbed to. Now, on that last point, again, I think a trap Newcastle have fallen into here is vaguely trying to replace Isak, which, let's face it, is an impossible task. There was not really another. The closest they could have got, probably Ekitike, who was wrapped up by Liverpool weeks ago, or possibly Nicholas Jackson from Chelsea, who of course went to Bayern in the end. But Voltemada certainly isn't in that mould. He's quite a difficult player to appraise, even taking away the sort of small sample size, because the combination of traits is slightly beyond compare. He's tall, very tall, just shy of 2 meters, doesn't boast electric pace, but isn't a slouch either, but has the ability to glide past defenders to fashion his own chances, which doesn't really look right for somebody of his stature. His shooting could be improved, and somewhat ironically, his aerial presence can also be lacking at times. He wins less than 50% of his aerial duels. Another issue that Bundesliga scouts mention is his overall weakness in ground duels. Now, duels, if you're not familiar with in statistical terms, is a metric that generally correlates really well with team performance. A team that wins more of their one-on-one individual duels will do well. It's hardly rocket science, but for Newcastle under Howe, this will not be music to their ears, and they will have to adapt his role in their press to accommodate him so that they're not just getting played around with essentially a man down. Compare this with Visser, and you can easily see Visser being a menace with Newcastle pressing on the front foot. Those who are high on Voltemada will point to the fact that he's, as we speak, the current German starting number 9 for the national team. But in the absence of Havertz and a few others due to injury, that's not much of an accolade. That's sort of more needs must. So what on earth are you meant to do with your waiver picks this week, especially if you are languishing down the bottom of the league and licking your lips at some of these new names? Perhaps you didn't draft your forwards very well on draft day. Perhaps you've picked up 1 or 2 injuries to your forwards. Voltemada certainly should be on your watch list, providing you need a striker. Those in the camp of having injuries in your forward ranks, do beware, because I don't think Voltemada starts in Gameweek 4. I think that Visser does, which gives Visser first refusal if they do settle into that pattern, with Voltemada then potentially starting the Champions League and the Cup games, which obviously won't be earning you many points in your draft league. The other way I'm thinking about this is that if we were to project Newcastle from now until game 38, and on one hand we had Visser starting as number 9 every week, and on the other hand we had Voltemada starting as a number 9 every week, I think the Newcastle that goes with Visser predominantly ends the season with more points than the other version. Now, Newcastle will not want to give up points, will not want to give up ground this year, given the nature of the Premier League and some of the spending that's gone elsewhere. The only way I think that they rationalise favouring Voltemada, that they want to bed him in. I don't see that personally. I think you can bed in a player like him, given the quantity of games that are going to be played, and also the options that he'll have to come on in tight turnaround game weeks to start, and also just to get 20-30 minutes off the bench, even if Visser did start. I think there is plenty of opportunity to bed him in without making him the sole focus of their attack, because right now, I just don't really know how that would look. Whereas with Visser, it all seems a lot more straightforward. And given how late they let Isak go, Visser is the most plug-and-play option that they could use, and that's why I think he'll start in game week 4. There is one other prominent forward who has also joined and is in the game now, So let's discuss him now before we kind of try and make a summing up decision there. That player is Kolo Muani for Tottenham. The French forward joins on loan from PSG to complete a bit of a European grand tour for him, having played in France, Germany, Italy, and now England. He was on loan at Juventus for the back half of last season, scoring 8 from 16 appearances, largely as a left-sided attacker, either behind a 9 or as part of a two-pronged attack. FPL have rather pleasingly added him as a forward, as they should, considering it's where he's played much of his career. And he will no doubt play some minutes as the Spurs number 9, given the current fragility of Solanke and imminent fragility of Richarlison. I think we will predominantly see him playing off the left in either a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. Also being just as useful in a 5-3-2 setup in the way that Tottenham lined up against PSG, or a 5-2-3. So it's a move that makes a lot of sense on paper, were it not for the fact that Spurs just signed Tell on a permanent long-term deal and also have Odobert on the books. But clearly the team have decided that was an area of weakness. And obviously the other thing that doesn't really play into draft circles too much was that Tell was also then left out of the Champions League squad. Bit of a strange one. So you wonder why that move was actually made permanent, whether they just saw the value there. We'll have to wait and see. The fact that Muani can comfortably slot into multiple spots there in the team is not a bad thing for a draft asset. He's a name that's been linked for Spurs for what feels like a couple of years now. And I get the impression, at least, that he sees himself as being a little bit above the stature of the club. And we'll have to let him prove it to us, basically. He certainly needs to prove it to me. His underlying numbers are solid. Career non-penalty expecting goal avoidance per 90 of 0.55. And that rises to 0.78 if you only take his PSG games into account. This is where numbers can deceive, though, because obviously you have to take into account that those numbers will be inflated slightly when you're playing for a team who dominates their league, such as teams like Bayern, Porto, etc., where a lot of the games are against pretty low caliber opposition. His stint at Juve saw him put up 0.43 and his breakout years in Frankfurt 0.63. So the floor here is pretty much an attacking involvement 1 in 2 games. The ceiling is higher, but with any player, minutes are the issue. And I think on this front, he'll be okay. A 90-minute man every week? Absolutely not. But a first-choice Spurs 11 on paper right now, I think would currently have him in it, playing on the left, and he hasn't even put the shirt on yet. So as a prelude to the next player on the list, his teammate Xavi Simons, I don't think he'll score as many FPL points as Xavi, but his inherent value as a viable forward in the game means his place in the overall rankings is prioritised. And this obviously goes back into positional scarcity that we talk about a lot in the summer. Now, if I were in need of a striker upgrade and if I was sitting bottom of my draft league, I needed a striker and I had the choice of Voltemada or Muani, I'm taking Muani. Now, take that with as big a pinch of Tottenham biased salt as you need. But for me, Muani is in his prime now at 26 and is as close to a we know what we're getting player as anyone making a move to the Premier League over the last week or two. He's tactically versatile. He has a skill set we want as draft managers, which is that he scores and assists goals. He can play off the left. He can play up front. And the areas that he can play in are a position of weakness in the Spurs squad in terms of the quality that he brings. So high floor with, I'd say, a relatively low ceiling. He's not going to be one who's booking a place in the 200-point club. Voltemada has a much lower floor, but if he can hit the ground running and becomes the mainstay starting number 9, does have the potential for greatness, but my big worry is that we will only truly see that, if we are going to see that, from next season. So you've got Muani, fairly high floor, fairly medium ceiling, Voltemada, lower floor, bit of a higher ceiling. That range for me, I'm taking Muani every day of the week, and particularly if you're in head-to-head league, for example. I want someone who can be a little bit more consistent and I know what I'm getting compared to someone like Voltemada. That being said, if you are number 2 in the waiver order and you need a forward and you prioritise Mwani, then Voltemada, and the manager below you takes Mwani and you end up with Voltemada, it's still a good pickup. It's still, it's still a very expensive player for a good team who should get minutes. It's just a bit more of a roll of the dice. So away from the forwards and into midfield, and I think for me, the standout, the premier midfield option who has arrived is Xavi Simons. Now, if you're not in need of a forward change because you drafted impeccably well and got all your players vaccinated against the hamstring virus, then I think you really ought to be tempted with the 22-year-old Dutch creative midfielder. Given his age and profile, this looks like incredible transfer value to me and someone that should more or less be a plug and play straight into this Frank Spurs setup as a number 10. Similarly with Kolo Muani, he's versatile. He could play minutes on the left side too. And he's also played some games off the right when needed. But I think predominantly he's been brought in as a replacement to Maddison, who we'll mention in just a few moments' time. The attacking returns are nicely split between goals and assists, as expected, for a creative number 10. And over the past 2 seasons with Leipzig in the Bundesliga, he's scored 18 and assisted 19 from 55 starts. Non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 of around 0.56. Spurs would never say anything like it publicly, but the expectation here is that he becomes the next star man now that Son has left and others are struggling to keep fit. He's even taken on the number 7 shirt. Data-wise, he is very, very similar to James Maddison. Since the start of last season, both have 16 goal involvements. Xavi's non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90 is 0.46 in that period. Maddison's is 0.5. Passing and defensive action stats are remarkably similar. And the difference, of course, is the main difference, of course, is the nearly 6-year age gap and the fact that Maddison, unfortunately, is starting to rack up quite a serious medical background. So it's not looking good for relying on him season in, season out over the next few years. If you are high on the waiver priority and have a midfield spot free, then Xavi is an investment that you're hoping can pay off right away to the end of the season. All things being equal, he is the obvious prize. But as I said earlier, the forward scarcity is as real now as it was a month ago. And so those of you needing an upgrade in that department will unfortunately have to pass over Xavi this week. But for the rest of you, needs to be penciled in somewhere on your waiver list. Carry on down the list. The next one in midfield is Garnacho, who has a bit of ownership because, of course, he was in the game at United, 4% owned. Still only 21, bags of Premier League experience, basically phased out due to not fitting with Amorim's style and also being what seems like a bit of a dickhead. But we have to be fair to him. Expecting a player to seamlessly shift up through the gears of their career in the tumultuous circumstances of Man United in recent seasons is not an easy task. And it's difficult to come up really with any young prospect who has significantly improved at Man United in recent seasons. Ahmad and Mainu are the only current possibilities, but you wouldn't put them in that list just yet. And as it stands, neither can find a way, reliably at least, in the starting 11. As far as Chelsea are concerned, you'd have to say they've got a bargain. 46 million euros, about 40 million pounds. Had the circumstances been different, had United not been looking to sell, then Garnacho could have fetched a fee that was 50% higher than that. But for Chelsea, I think Garnacho is the best out-and-out left winger at the club as it stands. Yes, Neto can play there, but always looks more comfortable on the right. João Pedro can, of course, do a job there. Gittins was expected to be the guy, but he's showing so far, for me, looks like a player who could have done with another year to fully cook somewhere in mainland Europe. He doesn't quite look Premier League ready just yet. And for leagues of sort of 10 plus, I don't mind picking up Garnacho, but he falls close to quite a large group of players who can churn out reliable points. And so for now, reliability isn't something we associate with him yet, but do not be surprised come the turn of the next international break in a few game weeks' time if Garnacho hasn't really knocked on the door to being a regular starter for Chelsea. Next is Harvey Elliott. Some of you have pretty strong opinions on Harvey Elliott's quality. Liverpool fans have a lot of respect for him. And similar to Garnacho, a pretty good amount of Premier League experience at just 22 years old. I'd love the situation he finds himself in at Villa to have been a bit better, but the calibre of club I think seems perfect for him to attempt to relaunch himself as a Premier League regular, and rather than someone who's always destined to be part of the supporting cast at Liverpool. 95 Premier League appearances, but averages just 37 minutes per appearance, which is what we know. He's mainly off the bench. So 3,500 minutes, non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90 of 0.43 is solid, but we have to see how much of that he can bring with his new teammates rather than playing around the likes of Salah, Luis Diaz, Diogo Jota, Firmino, Mane, etc., and whoever else he's found himself playing with at Liverpool. It is a slightly different setup. So he will be popular on the waivers because he's a familiar name and could go, I think rightly so, straight into the Aston Villa starting 11. But for me, as I commented on the Draft FC Discord chat last week, a bit of a watch and wait for now. But for those people like myself who do consider him a bit of a watch and wait, if he does turn out to be a success, I've no doubt there'll be managers out there in a lot of leagues who do take the punt early on. And so if you don't take it now, you're probably not going to get him. But I'm fine with that. Next is Yeremy Pino for Palace, who's basically the Eze replacement. It comes in the form of 22-year-old Spanish midfielder from Villarreal. 25 league starts last season, 4 goals and 7 assists. Non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 of 0.43, identical to Elliott's career average. And his career average is 0.45, so about the same. And at 30 million euros, you have to say pretty good value for money and a reasonable prospect for Palace to take a punt on. It seems he may be carrying a slight injury as it stands, but if he's fit, I think he'll go straight into the starting 11. Either way, I don't think it will be long, if he is injured or not, that he will be straight into the starting 11 because I do see him as the main Eze replacement, and I haven't seen enough quality from Devaney to nail that spot himself. And I think he'll be another popular waiver pickup, particularly for larger leagues, but again, in the same bracket as Elliott, he's someone that I'm more than happy to watch and wait for now. And I think if you're in an average size league, there are probably other options you're going to want to look at before the likes of Yeremy. And then the last player on this list, and it's a standout for the wrong reasons for me, is Matheus Fernandes, who we'll be familiar with from playing at Southampton last year. Crazy money from West Ham, who for me continue to be one of the worst operators in the transfer market. They even cemented a 40 million euro move for Todibo this summer, which is also mental. Fernandes is another young prospect with a bit of Premier League experience, having obviously started virtually every game for Southampton last year. His career numbers so far add up to a non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90 of 0.18. Rising to 0.22 if we focus on his Premier League numbers. Of course, that was in a very poor Southampton side, so we have to give him a bit of credit there. But my goodness, have West Ham paid a premium here for Lord knows what they're going to get. And in a summer where El Canous was very available for less money, I struggle to see what has led to this move. One good result against Forest does not paper over the cracks at West Ham. They need a lot of work to become a reliable team again, and I struggle to see how Fernandes makes that happen any sooner, and should not be one that you're considering anytime soon in your draft leagues. The back end of this list, we have, of course, got a couple of high-profile keeper moves. Donnarumma, quote-unquote, the best goalkeeper in the world, seals a 35 million euro move from PSG to City. You do have to question why PSG would so happily let go of the best goalkeeper in the world. Dare we say it? Is it because he's not the best goalkeeper in the world? Lots of chat out there about him being seemingly quite a poor tactical fit for Pep Guardiola on the face of it. And sometimes the sort of analysis and the chat out there is so on the nose for a reason. He is not in the same league as Ederson when it comes to use of his feet. Clearly is in a different league when it comes to his overall shot stopping ability, and particularly being a dominant figure in those big moments, in those big games. But you couldn't say he was that much, in my opinion, he's not that much better than Ederson to warrant the turnaround, not least when you've just brought in your goalkeeper for the future in James Trafford, who must be wondering what on earth is going on because he will not be first choice anymore. So, we have to consider Donnarumma because he will be the first choice Manchester City keeper, and they will dominate certain games to a point where he won't have a lot to do. He'll bank 6 points and won't do a lot else. That's about as much as I can sell him as, in exactly the same vein as Lomans, who's just joined Man United, and Onana has gone out on loan to Turkey. So again, he will be the starting goalkeeper for Man United moving forward, so we have to value him accordingly. If you're in a league of 10 teams or more, that means he needs to be in somebody's roster. On to some of the more exciting options. Tolu is another forward who's joined Wolves from Genk. 22 goal involvements last year from 28 starts, and a silly non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90 of 0.86. But that was in that league. He will be a backup to Strand Larsen, which was definitely needed. One to consider for the big leagues, and definitely one that we'll be talking about at times this season should Strand Larsen pick up any injuries. The more exciting one on this list, and it's only because of the fee that he's ended up on page 2 rather than on page 1, is Brian Brobby. The forward has joined Sunderland from Ajax. He's 23 years old, had a monster season 2 years ago in the 23-24 season with 26 goal involvements in the Eredivisie from 29 starts. Nowhere near as effective last year, but the underlying numbers have been consistently great, getting near enough to one expecting goal involvement per 90 for Ajax. I can't quite get my head around how Sunderland have managed to get him in for just 20 million euros. You can't buy anyone for 20 million euros these days, not least a centre forward with Champions League experience. I mean, they've only got to start him in half the games this year, and they could probably double their money on him in the summer, if they went down and had to cash in again. Absolutely bizarre. When you look at some of the other amounts of money that other teams have been throwing around for far less quality, with far less potential, that is up there with one of the best, or what could be one of the best value pound for pound or euro for euro moves of any club in the Premier League this season. We've seen impressive starts from Mayanda and Isidore coming off the bench, but I struggle to see how we don't see Brobby starting up top very, very soon. So make of that what you will if you're looking for forward options and having to scrape the barrel a little bit. In midfield, Backward joined as a right-wing option from Strasbourg to Nottingham Forest. And Doy has impressed enough so far, so I think he'll continue to be the main option. But with the amount of games they needed another body to cover there. Kevin, the fact we've now got a player called Kevin and a player called Perry in the game should hopefully make for some good jokes down the back end of the season. I can't pretend to know a lot about this guy other than he joins an esteemed list of Brazilian mononyms who have walked that path, including Willian, Fernandinho, and of course, Fred. He's only 21, doesn't have crazy underlying numbers from the Ukrainian league, and is one I think really we just watch and wait on. He's a left wing too, so he's unlikely to unseat Iwobi anytime soon. Probably just gives him a rest in some EFL Cup games. On the other flank, a spot more up for grabs. Fulham signed the experienced winger Samuel Chukwueze, 26-year-old Nigerian from Milan, made 50 appearances in Serie A. Just 21 starts though and only 9 attacking returns. The underlying numbers are all right, but a reasonable fee for an experienced body in there, and another one just to watch and wait on. The final one in midfield is Jadon Sancho. I don't need to talk much about Sancho. The floor here is basically at subterranean level, and the ceiling is moderate at best. He's definitely in the watch and wait camp for me. It really just comes down to what he wants to do and whether he wants to put any effort in. And then a name who I've seen pronounced 100 different ways already, Nkapie, has joined from Leverkusen to Arsenal for a decent fee. Versatile defender who can kind of cover left back and left centre back. The perfect Arteta mould, a hybrid defender. And one I'm sure we'll start to see rotated in as the season moves on. But not one I think you need to go out and bag in Gameweek 4. The standout departures, don't really need to spend too much time on because they will now be flagged. Ederson, and Onana are the keepers that have gone. Akanji has left. Kyrgios's gone. In midfield, O'Reilly left Brighton, which was much touted, and up front, Nico Jackson went to Bayern, and Højlund went back to Italy on loan. So any of you carrying those players all got pretty decent roster ownership as it stands. You've got some ready-made replacements that we've just discussed, and we'll continue to discuss as we enter the main section. Just wanted to show this slide. Those of you will be able to see it for those, if you're watching, but I'll kind of spell it out for those listening. Just the number of matches in if you're a Champions League team, you're a Chelsea and Arsenal, if you won the FA Cup or got to the final of the FA Cup, got to the final of the League Cup and the final of the Champions League, over the course of the year, you could play up to 67 matches. And so, if we think of Liverpool, for example, and Ekitike, Gakpo, Isak, where are they all going to fit? Wirtz, Szoboszlai, the fullbacks. There are so many minutes to go around. The key is spotting early the patterns which suggest the minutes are more likely to come for certain players in the league versus in the cups. And that's really what our work is. That's really what my work is week to week, is to try and spot those trends and try and put you onto them as quickly as we can. It's not always as straightforward as a player will play midweek, won't play at the weekend. Some players will play every single match. Some will play 2 out of 3 matches. Some will play 3 out of 4 matches. That's really what this boils down to. But just to try and think about the sheer number of games that these players have to play, there's a reason why squads like Liverpool would go and spend the kind of money they do on Ekitike and also spend the money that they do on Isak. And even for a player like Ekitike, if you can guarantee me he plays 2 out of 3 games the rest of the season, he's still a first rounder. So, we're just going to be realistic with our expectations.
Right.
Let me have a sip of water. That concludes the summer transfer stuff. Let's sort of do the normal game week stuff that we would ordinarily do, and I'm going to do it as quickly as we can. Waiver Watch before Game Week 3. The main players coming in: Chalobah, Spence, Dango, Grealish, Ndoye, Romero, Caicedo, and Van de Ven. Big thumbs up to all of those moves. The players that were leaving: Ballard, Martinelli, Archie Ampong, Ahmad, Jorginho, Lewis Kelly, Mitoma, and White. And generally, a thumbs up to those making way the other way. The key injuries: Smith for Bournemouth pulled his hamstring, another one who caught that virus. So we'll have to see who Bournemouth slot in there at right back. Saliba injured his ankle. He's expected to miss 3 to 4 weeks. That isn't confirmed, verified info. That was a rumour that came out over the weekend. Delap, of course, expected to miss up to 6 weeks. Ismail Assar did his hamstring too. The only kind of rumour we've heard there is he's been expected to miss the next 2 matches. Not quite sure what that means, but clearly suggests it's not on the more severe end of things. Shirky, hamstring, around 6 weeks. Cunha's hamstring seems to be on the much more tame end of things. He's already been pictured back in the gym and on the bike and stuff, so his may not be very bad at all. Gordon got sent off, of course, so he will miss the next couple of game weeks and will be back available in Game Week 6. And then Solanke, who we've continued to see absent. There was very much an unverified rumour that he would miss a couple of months and may even need surgery. Then, more recently, that's gone the complete opposite way, which suggests it's very minor. He was going to have an injection. He may miss 1 game. We haven't heard anything official yet. So for those who are thinking that he's going to be out for 2 months and already penciling him for a waiver drop, I would just hit the brakes a little bit there, because if you're in an engaged league and you drop Solanke and he's back next week, you're not seeing him again, because a manager at the bottom of the league will pick him up, and rightly so. So wait until we get, we've got a Friday waiver deadline. Spurs play on Saturday, don't they? Let's double check. Yeah, Spurs play on Saturday. So we should have some press conference info before the waivers process, hopefully. So yeah, just chill out on that one. These are the fixtures for Game Week 4. We kick things off with Arsenal against Forest. I like the look of Bournemouth against Brighton. I think that could be a bit of a goal fest. I like Palace at home to Sunderland, despite how well Sunderland have been. I think Palace could do a bit of a professional job on them there. Everton, favourites at home against Villa, it would have to be said. I like Fulham at home to Leeds too. I like Newcastle at home to Wolves. I like Spurs away at West Ham. and I like Chelsea away at Brentford. And on the Sunday, Liverpool away to Burnley, and then the Manchester derby to round off a nice contained Saturday-Sunday course of fixtures, because we've got some EFL Cup games in the following midweek. So, if we haven't already, let's talk about some main picks. So, I'm not going to talk about any of the players who were on the transfer slide. We'll just assume that we've done those to death. So in defence, Mosquera will likely come in for Saliba. His ownership is pretty reasonable already, but if he was available in your league, definitely worth a short-term punt over the next few weeks. And then really, it's the Crystal Palace defence. Gay, Lacroix and Mitchell, all with pretty low roster percentages with that home game against Sunderland. In midfield, Grealish, his ownership continues to tick up and up. I still think he's a good option. He's about half owned in 8-team leagues and a decent fixture on paper as he returns to his boyhood club, Aston Villa. Caicedo for Chelsea. It's a boring pick, but 42 DEFCONs in 3 games. He's already showing what a reliable performer he can be. He's not an exciting one, as I said, but he was the sort of player we knew could come alive with the changes in the scoring this year. So we're seeing that already. Szoboszlai, I think, away at Burnley is a good option. And now we know he's got another outlet to get into that starting 11 playing at right back as needed. Dango, you don't need me to talk about again. Anderson, probably one of the unluckiest players in the game so far. 3 weeks on the bounce. He's hit 11 defensive contributions, but they've got an away trip to Arsenal this weekend. So if he's going to get to the magical number 12 at any point, you would expect this one to be the one, and a decent banker, I think, for 4 points. Tavernier is another one who is very busy with the defensive contributions. We also know can be busy with the attacking contributions too. He's just signed a new long-term contract at Bournemouth, and the way that team has been ticking over, I don't see that Kluivert gets straight back into the 11. And then Jorginho, I'm still high on, despite him missing a little bit of time through injury. 11%, I think, for if you're in a 10-team plus size league, he's good enough to be in somebody's midfield. Up top, Muniz hasn't quite hit the roster percentage to suggest people are confident he's the starting man, but I'm fairly confident he's the starting man for Fulham this season. Mayenda, his ownership is creeping up. Again, rightly so based on performances, but as I said earlier with the talk about Robbie, I'd be careful. I wouldn't be putting too much investment into Mayenda because I think his starting spot is very much at risk. And then the final one is Thiago for Brentford. He is their starting number 9. They didn't bring in anyone else really to rival him. So yeah, I mean, these numbers are for 8-team leagues. He's definitely good enough to be in the top 18 centre forwards. So 46% should rightly creep higher going into Gameweek 4. Hidden gems. So these are players with generally less than 10% ownership in average size leagues. Loads of defenders remain available. Diu for West Ham. He just did another carbon copy assist with a massive in-swinging cross from the left flank for in an international game. I forget who he plays for now, a couple of days ago. Mings, if you want a bit of the Aston Villa defence, if you actually think Villa could keep Everton out. Toasting for Chelsea, just 5% owned for what we should expect to be a pretty much a mainstay in the starting 11 down the stretch now. That number has to go higher. Richards is your back doorway into the Palace defence if some of those higher owned players aren't available. Truffo doesn't play for Sunderland if you're looking at a side, plays for Bournemouth. He's been performing well. Coyote for Brentford, also been doing well on the defensive contributions. And Anderson for Fulham, also doing fairly well on the defensive contributions too. And they've got a home game against Leeds, so a good chance at a clean sheet as well. In midfield, Gravenberch for Liverpool remains in hidden gem territory. Xhaka has started to crank it up a bit in terms of what we could expect in FPL points output. Same with Dewsbury Hall. In attack, Nemecha is the star one there. He could be a hidden gem starting centre forward for Leeds going into the season. Now, Isidore, I'm not too fussed because I think he could be third choice in the forward ranks. And Guiu for Chelsea, given that, with the injuries, there aren't a lot of out-and-out number 9s floating around that squad, so he will get some minutes off the bench, no doubt. Into the Fantastic Four section, which we started last week. A quick recap. Last week we had Senesi, Rodon, Vifa and Adams. Senesi was the top scorer there, got 14 points. Rodon got 7. Vifa was injured and didn't play, so that's nul point. And Adams did get the 4 points. He got a yellow card, so because he would have got the clean sheet point as well. So he should have got 5, but -1 for the yellow. So have to say a hit for 3 out of 4 of those players and an average of just over 6 points is a very, very good start to this section. And yeah, for those of you that don't know, basically the point of this section is to try and pick out 4 players. Could just get a sweaty 4 points, which get you that win, that all-important win in your head-to-head matchup, or just keep the points ticking over, even if you're in classic scoring leagues. They're not going to light up your team, but just do a job when you need them to. So the selections for Game Week 4, we have 2 returning picks. Senesi and Adams remain on the list for their game against Brighton. I think that's another good opportunity for them to collect the defensive contributions. The other defender I'm bringing in is Van den Berg, who has done well on that front already, and with their game against Chelsea should be a good opportunity to do so as well. And then the final one in midfield is Cullen, who again has been doing pretty admirably on that front for Burnley, and against Liverpool again should have plenty of work to do. The predicted lineups I did a few days ago. I continue to tweak them. I'll probably do the next pass on Thursday before the deadline on Friday. So that will do for this episode. Forgive me for the length. I say this really is kind of drawing a line under what you could consider to be the pre-season content now, and from now on it really is just the bread and butter stuff, unless we do any bonus content over the international breaks. So a reminder again, if you want to have a look at what we've got on offer in the app at draftfc.co.uk, then you can get a 1-month free trial using the code KICKOFF for new customers. So head over there if you are interested. That'll do though for the time being. If you enjoy the content, give us a thumbs up. Click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, then make sure you're following on whichever podcast platform you use. Any of your specific waiver queries, do comment them down below. Obviously, the pod is out nice and early this week, so we should have plenty of time to engage in some back and forth as we need to in the comments, because as I always say, and particularly after an episode like this, going into a waiver window like this, I could have done an episode that was 10 hours long and still not quite cover the scenario that you find yourself in with your squad. So do comment any of your questions below and I'll get back to you. Give us a follow on X if you're over there as well. And without further ado, stay shook.